In the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier. Please be seated. So we're going to do things a little differently. Oh, and I missed my first word. You know what I normally say at this time? I usually say sit. Well, then I'll do stay. How's that? Thank you. I was a little distracted because I couldn't find a little prop for later. So we're going to do things a little differently today. I'm going to give a sermon, and then I'm going to invite the children forward, and I'm going to give a 2-minute sermon for the children, which I don't know about you, but I often understood and learned more at the children's sermon than I did the other sermon. But I'll let that up to you. So 2 choices for you to listen to. So stay. So if there had been an inquest about Jesus' death, after his death, this story from today would have been Exhibit A of why he died. See, the tensions were already high. It was midweek in Holy Week. It was Palm Sunday had happened. We catapulted in the gospel. This is where we are today. And so the crowds were coming out and singing, "Hosanna, save us." And then he went into the temple, and what did he do in the temple is he kicked out all the vendors, which really caused a ruckus too. And so this was really scary for the leaders at this point in time because they were worried that Rome would come and squash what could have been a rebellion. So any tensions rising in the city could be rebellion and not good. And so they saw him as an insolent upstart threatening the status quo. And he had whipped the city into a frenzy. And we know this Roman backlash happened. And they were like, let's unmask him as the pretender he is. And so they devised a trap for him. And in Jesus' style, did he answer the question they posed him? Not really. He gave them more questions. So he sidesteps it with a parable. A parable about a vineyard and 2 sons. The first son who started with a no to his dad and ended up with a yes. And the second son with a yes and ended up as a no. That change of mind, metalomenia, mima, sorry, my Latin's terrible, or Greek in this case, actually. Greek is terrible too. It means change of heart, a change of cares, a new direction. The leaders are the yes men. They failed to recognize that this new way of being was a part of God as well. And they were denying God in that sense. Perhaps they were just caught up in the way things are done. They had created this system brought to them by God. And so they had pretty much invested everything into this way of being, this system. And then the world changed, and God is in that change. And suddenly they're like, wait a minute, what? Maybe they thought they were doing the right things, but they had gotten attached to their own ideas and what those things were, and it was hard for them to maybe accept the correction. Anybody know anybody like this? Have you ever had a way of doing things that has worked for you forever, and then suddenly something happens and it doesn't work anymore? I mean, that's life. That's changed this life, right? You could be in a team that worked really well for 20 plus years, and then something changes, the system changes, or maybe someone new comes in. And suddenly the way it was no longer works. We really get caught up into these routines. I get caught up in these routines. There's a reason for it. How many of you go the same way home no matter where, you will go the same way home from church, even though there might be 5 or 6 different ways to go? Yeah, we get into these routines. You know why we get into these routines? We get into these routines is because routines help our brains take little breaks. I do the same thing every single morning so that I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to think, did I brush my teeth? Well, I know I did because I do the same thing every single morning, right? And these routines help us get through a life that is constantly bombarded with problems and issues. Our brains often need that space and time to think about them. So these routines can be very life-giving in some ways. The problem is that sometimes the way we've always done it isn't going to work. And we get really caught up in the way it was done instead of what the Spirit might be giving us. I hearken back to Reverend Lynn's sermon, I'll have it my way, because sometimes it ends up it's because it was our way, this is why we're caught up in it. Well, scientists say that we need these things, these routines, these way of being, and as we age, they're even more important. But in order to continue to have plasticity in our brains, we need to make conscious choices to learn and do things new. When we learn something new, it helps our brains to be able to adapt to the world and the change that it is. So, given that, knowing that change is inevitable, what is God calling you to change today? Every new thing, every new relationship has potential, has hope, has possibility of transformation. This is how resurrection works. It's hard though. Just like the Israelites in Egypt, last week they were complaining and so upset, lost in the wilderness, and they're like, Moses, it was so much better as slaves in Egypt. Why are we out in the desert in the wilderness? And this Sunday's story continues that. Instead of being hungry, they're now thirsty. They're like, where have you brought us? And Moses reminds them the God that we have. The God we have is a God who brings water out of a rock, life out of death. What feels like a dead end can be a whole new way of life. But it requires us to be willing to make the changes that God is asking us to make, to trust God. That we may be lost right now in the wilderness, but just over the path, there's a whole new way of being. This is good news, because we believe in a God that no matter how far down the pathway you are of your way or the highway or whatever it might be, that God always welcomes you back. That there's an invitation for you every step of the way. God hopes and trusts that your no will become a yes. There's a midrash about the story of Adam and Eve. As Adam and Eve are cast into the wilderness, they are said, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. We get really focused on the dust part of that sentence. But in truth, what we should be focused on is the you shall return. We have a God who wants us and promises us that we are welcomed into that vineyard any moment, all the time. The road to the vineyard is always open, despite our worries, despite our quarreling, despite forgetting that we're lost, despite being lost. That if we listen to God, in the end, God is a God who will quench our thirst by surprising us with living water, who will refresh us so it looks like a dry rock, who will resurrect us from an empty tomb, who brings new life even in the valley of the shadow of death. May we be a people who embraces that kind of transformation, resurrection, and change. May our hearts be one always looking for the hope and the love in whatever change comes about us, and that our hearts may be exhibit A for God's love. Amen. Now I'd like to invite all the children to come forward. Come on forward. Come on forward. It's change. Come on forward. Come sit down with me. All right. I'm going to stand up for just a few moments too, so they can see our pictures. All right. This is one of my favorite books. Anybody want to read that? Can you read that for me? The title.
Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day.
Anybody know this book?
Say it aloud.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Okay. You ever had a terrible, horrible, no good day? Right? Yeah. This is a story about that, right? He wakes up one morning and he has gum in his hair. It's terrible, right? He got out of his bed and then he tripped over his skateboard and he dropped his sweater in the sink while the water was running. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Now, Alexander keeps going through his day, and it just gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. His brother finds the prize he's been waiting for in the cereal box forever. In the carpool, he gets stuck in the middle seat, and he gets squished. His friends, all of a sudden, find new friends, and he gets worried about that. And before you know it, I think, not in the book, but I think he starts looking for things to be upset about. You ever gotten that way where you're looking for something, and that's all you see then? That's what happened to Alexander. And did his day get better or worse? Worse, because he was looking for that sort of thing too. Sometimes we get like that in life. But sometimes God will give us a sign. What's that sign say? Green. It's a green light. Sometimes God gives us another sign. Who wants to read this one? Henry. New traffic pattern ahead. It's a sign to God that maybe we should start thinking and doing things differently. Okay, here's a sign. I just think these traffic signs are amazing, so I want you to try to figure out what this one is. Yeah, eh? You know what that is? Okay, tell me what it is. The lanes are merging. The left lane is going to end. Sometimes God gives us a sign that things are going to change. What is this change? Or maybe we should change our perspective, how we look at things, how we take care of people. Here's another sign. Roundabout. That's right, a roundabout. So, God tells us that maybe we need to change our way of looking for the things that are not so great in our lives. To start looking for that smile, that hug, that love from our mom, our teacher, our dad, from our friends. And we can start looking for love and light. And things will change, right? What I love about this sign is that if you have enough change, good things happen. What good things can happen out of this change? I can tell you right now, it could be gelato. This is a gelato can, if you can't see. I have enough change, good things can really happen, literally. Exactly. And we can help make things change by looking for light and love and spreading it out. So, give me 5 for change. Thank you for coming. 5? All right, 5. Gemma. All right, see you later. May we be the change we're called to be.